You don't get remember that easily, guys. Okay. So just a warning, this is like a really weird topic to talk about. So just be prepared for weirdness, okay? Be prepared for like it to not really make a lot of sense. So I didn't know this at the time, but in September, so like 3 months ago, my parents were weeks away from sending me to a mental hospital, and then God healed me overnight. So, yeah, let's go back to the beginning of my story. So my mental health was like totally fine. I was just like a normal kid until September of 2024, so like a little over a year ago. And then I developed a mental disorder called contamination OCD. So OCD stands for obsessive compulsive disorder, and it causes people to have like really bad intrusive thoughts, unwanted urges, and to just feel like they need to complete tasks or rituals. It causes people to feel like a certain thing. So like the contamination part of it causes people to feel like a certain thing is dirty. So this thing is different for every single person who has it. It can be dirt, dust, plastic, certain foods or textures. Like it can be literally anything. Like it could be like, oh, I think that like the feeling of like a carpet is dirty, you know, it can be like anything. But for me, it was human flesh. So anything that was like, I couldn't touch other people. I couldn't touch anything that was touched by other people. So this table, you know how like Riley touches this table every single day because his human flesh touches it, then I couldn't touch it. So basically everything that had been touched or was human flesh, I couldn't touch. And it wasn't just that I wouldn't touch it, it was that I couldn't. It was kind of like when you're trying to swallow something but like your gag reflex kicks in. You know what I mean? Like you're trying to swallow it and like you just can't because your gag reflex kicks in. It was like so uncomfortable to the point that when I was forced to touch things, because like, you know, it's really, I can't go through life without like touching anything. When I was forced to touch contaminated stuff, this terrible feeling of disgust would just like come over my skin and it would just linger there, and like no matter what I did, I couldn't get rid of it unless I like scrubbed it off with soap and water. So not like normally washing your hands, like scrubbing the feeling off of you. So this feeling of uncleanliness was just around me all the time. It was the only thing that I could think about. You know, like I was just constantly surrounded by it. I couldn't focus on anything except for that. And I kind of thought that I was going insane. The only place that I could really escape my OCD was when I was swimming. The feeling didn't go away when I was swimming, but it was really easy to forget about it when I was swimming. So my sport kind of became like God to me. I factored it into every single decision that I made, and I thought about it constantly, and it was the only thing that made me feel safe. So I wasn't turning to God to help me with my OCD, I was turning to my sport, and you know, it helped for a while. It was really nice to have that, but I should have been turning to God instead. I really try not to think about God at all. I skip church a lot, you know, because I have swim, so it's really easy to just be like, oh, I can't go to church. And I didn't really pray a lot, and when I did pray, it would be routine prayers. I don't know if anybody, like before they go to bed, like their parents when they were younger would be like, now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep, that kind of prayer. Like those prayers are great, you know, for like younger kids, but at our age we should really be moving on from those kind of prayers because they're really routine and they don't necessarily mean anything. I mean, they do mean something, but we should be trying to move on to more deep, like personal prayers, and I was just trying to use routine prayers, you know, and like praying before you eat and that kind of stuff. I didn't ever really truly pray to God. So the feeling of disgust that that just constantly refused to go away, it was just always there, and I just got so fed up with it that I would try and scrub it off because that was the only way to get rid of it. So every single night in the shower, I would scrub myself so hard that my skin started to come off. Lots of nights I would just make myself bleed in the shower just to get the feeling off of my skin because there was no way to get this feeling off of my skin. My skin was barely hanging on my body. It was really thin and dry, and I was just constantly in pain. And when I was swimming, it was even worse because, you know, getting into a chlorinated pool with wounds all over your body is not a great feeling. But, you know, anything was better than the feeling of disgust, so I kind of just welcomed the pain. I didn't really let myself think of what I was doing as self-harm, because self-harm normally refers to cutting and burning and stuff like that, not scratching your skin off. It was just such a weird way to be harming yourself that I just like didn't allow myself to call it or think of it as self-harm. So by January of 2025, so now like 4 months, I can't do math, had passed. And my showers were now 2 hours long every single night. I was in the shower for 2 hours every single night, guys. Like, it's a long time to be in the shower. On top of like swim practice and homework, it's a lot. So my OCD had completely taken over my life. You know, there wasn't a single moment of my life that I wasn't thinking about my OCD. You know, it was just always there. I hadn't like hugged my parents or even like held their hands in months. I couldn't ride in cars because the seats were contaminated, so I couldn't sit on like the seats in cars. But of course I had to, so when I was forced to, I would have to sit on the very edge of my seat, and I couldn't like put the seatbelt on, so it's actually kind of a miracle that I survived a year without wearing a seatbelt. I couldn't touch anything in my house. I couldn't touch countertops. I couldn't touch like faucets. I couldn't touch door handles. I couldn't sit on chairs, stools, couches. I couldn't sit on the floor. I couldn't touch anything. I couldn't go in small rooms. Like, our kitchen is pretty small, and I couldn't be in there with other people because they were too close to me, and there was just such a fear that they were going to like accidentally contaminate me. So I just was like an island for months. You know, nothing touched me. I didn't touch anything. And like, I'm not over exaggerating. Like, I literally went months without like my skin coming into contact with anything on purpose. When it came to school was like a living hell for me. I just really tried to block it out. It still was really hard to think about going to school then. I just like went numb at school, and I just ignored everything and everybody. And I started to think about killing myself a lot, because I thought that anything was better than going through what I was going through. I stopped eating a lot, not because of like body image, but because I was just unmotivated to do anything. And I really thought that I was going insane, and I just wanted everything to be over. And when I was thinking about killing myself, I never considered the after. You know, I didn't think about God in that decision. I didn't think about like, was I going to heaven? Was I going to hell? I didn't think about like, what happens after you die? You know, I thought that anything was better than my life, even hell, which of course is not true, guys, because burning in hell is like way worse than what I was going through. And when I wasn't super depressed, like the rare times that I wasn't super depressed, I was having panic attacks. So I just never felt like myself, or even just a normal person, and that really scared me. Yeah, so it got to be summer, and summer went by, and it was better, you know, when I wasn't at school, because I could really hide from everything that contaminated me more. And when it was time to go back to school, I got so scared of going back to school that I actually ended up having to switch schools at the beginning of 8th grade. It was better after I switched schools, but it was still like basically the same as at my old school. I was just afraid of everybody. I didn't talk to anybody. I just was like, you know, super antisocial. Everybody at my new school probably thought that I was like crazy or something. Yeah, so, but on September 22nd, everything changed. We had to go to California on vacation for the weekend, and when we got back, like really late at night, or not when we got back, but when we were at the airport, when we were on our way back to Boise, this feeling just came over me of just like God with me. You know, I don't even know how I knew that it was God. I just like knew, because this feeling of just like comfort and safety just came over me. And at an airport, which airports are kind of dirty and disgusting and stuff. I don't know how I knew that it was God, but I just knew. He just covered me with this feeling of like, there was no pain, there was no disgust, it was just like a feeling of comfort, you know, and I didn't feel contaminated at all for the first time in over a year. And I started thinking over the year and how my life had been ruined, and how I just like, I hadn't tried to escape my OCD at all. I had just been trying to coexist with it, and I had just been letting it rule my life, and I started to realize that I didn't want that anymore. I wanted to escape my OCD. And I realized like, I need God to do this, you know. So after a year of ignoring God, he kind of just like came over me and was just like, yeah, you kind of have to acknowledge me now, buddy, no more ignoring me. So I accepted that I needed like God to help me do that. And then we got home really late at night, so I went to sleep. And I didn't really think about the action steps of how I was gonna get better, you know, what I was gonna do. But I woke up on the 23rd of September, and just something felt like different, you know. I got out of bed, and like, I didn't know what happened. I just felt so different. It was kind of like if you're in like the ocean for a while and you just got out and you're like, you still feel the waves around you, I just felt like disoriented and just kind of weird. And then I just realized what happened, I just realized. So I walked out of my room and I saw my mom and I just told her, like, I don't have OCD anymore. God healed me, and I hugged her. So I've been OCD free for 3 months now. It's pretty great. It was so weird to just be healed like overnight. I don't even fully understand how it happened, but yeah, I was going to an OCD specialist before all that happened, and we went to her after I was healed. She said that she'd never seen anything like it ever before. Before I was like, she was telling my parents that I need to go to a mental hospital because of how, bad my OCD was, which they did not tell me that I was going to go to a mental hospital, but, they knew. And then afterwards, she said that I was, like, subclinical at this point. So, yeah. I never thought that something like this could ever happen, especially not to me. But, here I am. I've really done nothing to deserve this miracle. I don't think anybody ever really deserves a miracle. None of us really deserve God's love because it's so pure and amazing, but here we are. In all the Gospels, there's the story of the woman who was bleeding for 12 years, and when she walked up to touch Jesus' cloak and she was healed, Jesus turned to her and said, "Your faith has healed you," right? And I always thought, like, that's such a cool story, like, her faith healed her, but then I always started to associate, like, being healed with how much faith you have, but I had no faith. I had no faith whatsoever. For the entire year that I was struggling, I had no faith. I just tried to ignore God. So I think a better person in the Bible that I can relate to is Barabbas, who's the guy that was supposed to die on Jesus' cross. So I'm going to read that part. So Jesus before Pilate, it's Matthew 27:11. 15, sorry. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At the time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. And in Luke, it tells us that he was in prison for insurrection in the city and for murder, so he was a pretty bad guy. So when the crowd gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which do you want me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who was called the Messiah?" For he knew that it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release? Or which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked them. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they shouted all the louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead the uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them. But he had Jesus flogged and handed over to be crucified. So Barabbas, who's this terrible person, we don't really think about him very often because we're all focusing on Jesus and we're like, "Oh my God, Jesus is about to die, that's so sad." So we're kind of all focusing on that part of the story. But if we think about Barabbas in the story, he was saved just like the rest of us, and even more in a literal sense than all of us, because he was about to be crucified and get the same fate that Jesus was, but Jesus literally came and took upon his cross for him. Like we always use this metaphor of like, Jesus came and took my cross up for me, but like he literally did that for Barabbas. And Barabbas had no faith. He was a terrible person. He was a murderer. He was as far away from God as he could possibly be, and yet Jesus literally took up his cross for him. So I relate to Barabbas in that way, not in the being a murderer way and any of that, but in the whole, in the sense that I was living in sin, and then Jesus just really came out of nowhere and just freed me. And so sometimes we're not like the woman who's bleeding for 12 years, but Jesus still saves us. So what I've really learned from this is that like no matter how much sin you're living in, no matter how terrible of a person you are, God is always there, like even when you don't feel him, even when you like cut off contact with him for an entire year of your life, he's always there. Romans 38 tells us, "For I am convinced that neither death," guys, my pronunciation. "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, nor height nor depth, nor anything in all creation will be able to separate us from the love that is God in Jesus Christ our Lord." So what this verse is basically telling us is that no matter how far away you think that you are from God, he's always there. He knows that we've neglected him. He knows that. He knows how little faith we have. He knows that we have no faith. He knows, and he really deeply cares. He sees us struggling, and he doesn't wait for us to reach up to him, and he doesn't wait for us to reach up and be like, "God, please come help me." He'll reach down into our grave and pull us out, even if we're running away from him as fast as we can, just trying to get as far away from him as possible. He's gonna chase us because he loves us so much, and he's willing to go into all of our sin and meet us there. Romans 8:18 says, "I consider that our present suffering is not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us." And I just think that this is so true. Our present suffering sometimes feels like it's just going to be not just in the present, but in the future, and it's just going to last forever. But, we have no idea the amazing things that God is going to do with us and what's just going to come in our lives. So, no matter what you're struggling with, just wait, because God's about to do something so amazing in your life. Thank you for letting me share. Yeah.